Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel Peterisms, where I tell stories of my life and just little things that I have learned as I have grown into the person that I am today. And I just want to talk today. I started watching the movie The Anonymous People last night. This is a movie that has been recommended to me for years and years and years by many different people. I think it came out, they talk a lot about 2012 in there, so I think it came out in 2012, something like that. If you don't know what it's about, it is about addiction and recovery, but it's really more about people that are in long-term recovery. And it talks about there being over 25 million people in the United States that are in long-term recovery from addiction, from many different ways, from 12-step programs to whatever. And I think it's probably no mystery to anyone that watches any of my channels that I'm very involved in a 12-step program, and that I have been, you know, since I got sober, with the exception of a few years where I really had no emotional sobriety and no spiritual foundation, and really wasn't doing anything for my sobriety or my recovery whatsoever. But, you know, I was watching this last night, and really the film is about people telling their stories, basically to plant the seed. And it's really about this whole idea of anonymity and our fear of like telling our stories, and what does anonymity mean from a 12-step point of view. And you know, it's interesting being in recovery on a social media platform like YouTube, because I have been very, very careful in how I tell my story. And I think anybody that's out there that's in a 12-step program has probably caught the ways that I am very careful, and the things I say and the things that I don't say. For example, me saying that I'm not a representative of any 12-step program is important for me. This is just me sharing my experience, strength, and hope. That being said, and you know, like before I ever started talking about my recovery or my addiction on YouTube, I talked to my sponsor at the time, and have continued to talk to my sponsor now that I have, about being online. And both sponsors and other people in recovery have said, as long as you make it clear that you're not a representative of a 12-step program, you can share your story. You can say I'm an alcoholic. You can say that you're an addict. You can talk about the things that happened to you. That's your story. You can share that. And I think it's really, really important that whatever we're going through in our world, whatever we've gone through, that we share our story. You know, Oprah talks about this idea of turning your wounds into wisdom, and I really, really love that idea, and I've always been inspired by that idea, you know? And it's part of the big reason why I do share my story. When I got sober, it's interesting. So when I got sober, you know, there's this one guy in the movie, and he says, everybody knew I was using, so when I got sober, it wasn't like, you know, I was going to be secretive about it either. And that was kind of my attitude, was, you know, that there was really nobody that didn't know how far down I had gone with my addiction. So when I got sober, it was like, I wasn't ashamed to be sober. There wasn't the shame that went along, I think, with other people. Whereas maybe with other people, nobody knew that they had an addiction issue, or nobody knew that they were, you know, alcoholics secretly drinking at home. And so when they got sober, to tell people that they were sober, it's like, oh, well, I didn't know that, you know, you even had a problem, and things like that. And so then we become afraid to share our story. I think one of the important things, so I stopped watching it about halfway through. But they're doing this training because they're trying to, you know, like really help people get sober and plant the seed by telling their stories. And what they say is, if we could tap into this resource of 25 million people with long-term sobriety in the United States, like that's an untapped resource. If we could tap into that resource, we could be saving hundreds of thousands of lives, you know, of this disease of addiction. And, you know, there's this one part where they reference HIV and AIDS and in the 80s, and they talk about it, about how, this guy's talking about how, and I rented it on Amazon Prime. You can rent it. I think it's $3.99 over there, the movie. It's the only place I could find, well, there's like, you could find it on YouTube and other places to rent it, but that's the only place that I could find it to rent it for cheap. So anyway, but this guy's like, you know, it always, he said to to me, it was always comparable to like when the AIDS epidemic hit. And he goes, in the gay community, they weren't silent about it. And they're showing all of these people. And it was, I think, from the group ACT UP that had the t-shirts that said silence equals death. And he said, you know, they weren't silent about it. They weren't quiet about it. They were shouting it in the streets as they marched. And no matter like what their stance was, where they were coming from or whatever, they all came together for this purpose. And I think that, you know, in many ways, that is, to some degree, where the problem continues to exist. And what I'm about to say is not a very popular opinion, okay? I work a 12-step program. I think if you watch me on YouTube, you know I do not believe that is the only way for people to get sober, okay? I believe that there are people that can get sober through spirituality, through church, that maybe people are on maintenance programs, that do other things like therapy with maintenance programs, or that people just go to therapy. You know, there are a lot of different ways that people get sober. There's a lot of different programs out there, not just a 12-step program. And for me, it's always been about just the alcoholic and addict that's still out there not dying. I don't want one more alcoholic or addict to die. I don't really care how they get sober. I really honestly don't. You know, for me, at the time that I got sober, there weren't all these programs out there. There wasn't Celebrate Recovery. You know, there wasn't the Straight program. There wasn't, you know, like a lot of maintenance drugs out there. I mean, hell, I don't even think Antabuse was available when I got sober, you know? And so there weren't all of these different maintenance drugs that we have out there today, which mostly are highly monitored if they're used correctly by a doctor and with therapy and things like that, right? Okay, so, you know, I think like if our attitude changes and we start looking at telling our stories from the point of view that we are people, like it was interesting, they talked about in there like identifying not as just saying we're alcoholics and addicts, because when you say, I mean, and that's a 12-step thing, I'm always going to say that, right? And I'm not ashamed of being an alcoholic or an addict. Like that is not a negative, doesn't have a negative connotation to me today. But they were doing this training and they said, what words do you know that people associate with alcoholics and addicts? And it was like loser, junkie, you know, crackhead, pothead. It was like all these words. And he said, what is the commonality between these words? And somebody said they're all negative. And he goes, what we need to do is change the attitude about that, right? That if we can start showing people that are in long-term sobriety that we have lives, that we're not a glum lot, that we have amazing lives, we have relationships that are thriving, that not just romantic relationships, but family relationships, friends in our lives, we have homes, we have careers that we love, we are passionate about doing these things, right? And that we have overcome these things and we have recovered from addiction. And I think that that's an important thing to be putting out there and to be saying to people and to be giving them hope. You know, and that is what I have always tried to do in telling my story and sharing my story, is to give hope and to let people know that wherever you go and get help, whatever you do, each day that you stay alive out of addiction is another day of hope that you have, is a chance that you have that for this amazing life. I have an amazing life today. I didn't think this was possible, you know? I didn't think that this was possible 27 years and 11 months ago. I had no idea that, I mean, I had no idea that I would even be able to ever down the road say 27 years. I thought I couldn't say 27 days. I couldn't hold 27 days together, let alone 27 hours together of sobriety, you know? And if I'm sitting here, and I mean this, and I absolutely mean this, I get questions a lot from people. I get a lot of DMs, and I don't even really know how to answer them sometimes, you know. I just recently got a message from somebody saying, for a family member, that they wanted to know which video of mine was the best one to show them to help them. And I thought, God, of all of my videos that I've talked about recovery, like, I don't know. Like, what do you say, you know, to that? Show them one where I'm happy. Show them one where I'm laughing. You know, I get moved because I'm so grateful for the life that I have today. Show them one where I'm flipping a fan. Show them the one where I can't stop laughing and I'm telling some stupid joke. Because that person should have died 27 years ago. I couldn't hold 27 hours together, let alone 27 minutes of sobriety. You know, when I got out of treatment, I'd go like 15 minutes, 20 minutes at a time, and I'd be like, God, if I could just make it another half an hour I can use in a half an hour, you know, and I craved so bad, and then I just did it, and I did what I was told, and I just held on, and day by day things got easier, and they do, and they will for you. And no matter how you do that, you know, no matter what that means for you. For me, the reason why I went to a 12-step program, okay, and when I went at first, I don't really know what I thought. I thought it was very biblical, which it's not. I thought it was very cultish, which it's not. I thought it was all old people, which it was. And there's still a lot of older people, but there's a lot of young people in recovery today too. And I thought it was brainwashy, but maybe my brain needed to be washed a little bit. I don't know. And I thought it was very confusing. And I thought it was all written in old-timey words and things like that. The reason I went was because I had ran out of options. And I say this to people a lot because I want people to know this. I didn't stop drinking and using drugs because I was done. And a lot of my friends have gotten to this point where they're like, I'm done, I'm walking into treatment, I've had it, I can't do it anymore. There are a lot of people that walk into treatment that way, right? But I think that there's this mentality that you have to have this desire to go in and stay sober to stay sober. You don't have to have that desire. You can stay sober for your kids for a while. You can stay sober to save a job or your marriage. A lot of other people have stayed sober for 90 days to 6 months because they wanted to save their marriage or they didn't want their kid to see them drunk anymore. And in staying sober for 3 to 6 months, after a while, they realize, I kind of like this and I want to keep this up. And so they do, you know. But the reason that I went was not for any of those things. It was because it wasn't working for me anymore. If drinking and using drugs still worked for me the way they had, I would still be out there drinking and drugging today. If it still took away the pain and numbed the pain for me the way that it had at the beginning, I would still be drinking and drugging today. If I didn't get busted, get caught, have family and friends that hated me and didn't want me around as a result of it, I would still be drinking and drugging today. The reason that I stopped was because I ran out of options and I was afraid of being homeless because that was a reality for me. And the only way that I knew at that time in 1994, going into 1995, the only way I knew to stay sober was what other sober people were doing. And at that time, that was going to 12-step meetings. So that's what I did. And that's what I still do because that's what's worked for me for 27 years. And, you know, I hope that I continue to do that for the rest of my life because it's brought me a lot of joy. It's introduced me to some of the most amazing people I've ever met in my entire life. But I just want people to stay alive today. I just want people to have the opportunities and the joy and the laughter that I've had, you know. I think that's the hardest thing for me whenever I get the call about a friend of mine that has passed from this disease. And I think sometimes I steer away from saying things that I really believe. And I really, truly do believe that it's a disease. I really do. And I think it scares people to say that, you know, but we're not fighting saying other things that are diagnosed by the American Medical Association are diseases. So why would we veer away from saying this? The reason I do is because I don't want to get into arguments with people about it, because the arguments keep people in the specific details, and the specific details keep people out here in the weeds, not here in the thick of the hope. And I want to keep people in the thick of the hope so that we can save lives. Because when I get those calls, what I always think to myself is, God, they could have had such an amazing life, you know, like, I see their life past that point. And I want that for each and every one of you out there. and I want, you know, whatever your story is. Maybe it's not about addiction and recovery. Maybe your story isn't a story about neglect. Maybe your story is a story of abuse. Maybe your story is a story of a bad marriage that you got out of. Or maybe your story is about a bad marriage that you saved. You know, or maybe your story is, I don't know, about being lonely and getting through that, or depression and anxiety, or therapy, you know. I mean, whatever your story is, you know, maybe your story is about an eating disorder. Maybe your story is whatever. Share that story with somebody else. Turn your wounds into wisdom. Help one other person out there. Because if we could all just help one other person out there, imagine the power in that, you know? Imagine that power. Anyway, I just wanted to get on here and talk today. I was a little inspired by watching that movie last night. And so let me know what you think in the comment section below. I love you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.